All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar around navigating unemployment for family child care providers. We'll get started in 1 minute. There's a lot of questions coming in right now about if you'd be able to see yourself. This is a webinar, so you're only able to see our presenters and our staff here tonight. You won't be able to see one another. Okay, so we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. We are really glad that you were able to join us this evening to discuss unemployment. We know that this is a tough time for all, and we're hoping that tonight we can provide you some information that will be valuable for you yourself as a family child care provider and an employer, as well as potentially for your assistants and employees that you have in your programs. I am Natalie Kienoff-Goldsmith. I am the New York Director for All Our Kin, and I am excited that I am joined today by some of my colleagues at All Our Kin, as well as with our partner agencies, NILAG and South Bronx Rising Together. From All Our Kin, we have both two business coaches joining us, Rosemary Gozueta, who is our Bronx business coach, as well as Jane Lee, who is a is our business coach from New Haven, and is well versed in all things business and unemployment. We also are joined by Hasiel Olvera, who is our toolkit coordinator in the Bronx, and she'll be happy to answer any tech questions throughout the evening. From South Bronx Rising Together, we have Lara Kiriko, and from NILAG, which is the New York Legal Assistance Group, we have Anna Maria Segura, and she is an attorney that is focused on employment and will be really leading the majority of the presentation this evening, with our team stepping in and answering any specific family child care questions. Like I said prior, we will be answering questions throughout the session, but most questions will be answered at the end. If you have specific questions around unemployment, please put those in the Q&A box. If you have comments that you just want to share or mentionings, saying hello, please put those in the chat box, and our team will try to respond in real time to you, and if not, we will try to get to those at the end of the session. The session will be recorded, and so it will be available afterwards for those who attended and those who are unable to make it. We know that there's a lot of information going to be shared tonight, and a lot of it is very detailed and hard to digest. So please take it in, be able to reflect upon it, and afterwards, our team will be happy to answer any questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Anna Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here remotely. I wish I could see all your faces, but until another presentation, until another time, maybe. But my name is Anna Maria Segura. I'm the supervising attorney of the Employment Law Project, and I'm here to walk through the basics of, kind of navigating New York's unemployment insurance benefit system. Generally the traditional program, but also the big changes that have come through the CARES Act during this pandemic. So I'm just going to give a quick two quick disclaimers. One is just that this has been quite a moving target. I can't tell you how many changes have occurred in this presentation or this different versions of this presentation since the pandemic hit, since the CARES Act passed. And the Department of Labor continues to keep us on our toes in terms of giving advice that's up to date. So I just want to say, you know, given that there have been changes in the law and in the practice of the DOL, we just want to make sure you all are clear that this is the best information we can give at this point, and it is subject to change. And the other disclaimer I should give is that my focus is really on employment, on representing employees. And so to the extent that there are questions that are specific to small business owners or to a little bit less traditional employment, I might have a good answer for it, but I also will defer to my colleagues on the panel. I would rather not give or I'd rather give an incomplete answer than an inaccurate one. So just FYI, my focus is generally on employees. So just a quick run through the agenda of what we're going to go over. So first, I'm going to briefly touch on, you know, what the regular unemployment. I'm going to say UI a lot. UI is my shorthand for unemployment insurance. So first, an overview of the UI system in New York State. Then go over some of the changes to that system under the CARES Act. And then we'll get into the kind of nitty-gritty about how to apply for benefits. We'll go through recertification, which is a huge part of once you have submitted your claim for benefits, what you need to do to continue to certify, make sure you're able to receive benefits every week. Touch on what happens if you're denied, what are your options and what are your rights. And then really we're going to try to give as much time as possible to frequently ask questions and to the questions that will be coming in. So so I will try to, it's a lot of information, like Natalie said, to digest, and I'll try to be as clear as possible, but please feel free to ask questions and we'll do our best to answer them kind of on a rolling basis if it makes sense. Okay, so the New York State unemployment insurance benefit system. So this has been around for a long time, but you know, this system traditionally, you know, are weekly cash benefits that are paid to employees who have been separated from their employment through no fault of their own. So employees is in italics because really it applies to W-2 employees who are paid on payroll, the way you think of, you know, that they're paid on they're not paid on a 1099, they're not independent contractors, they're truly employees of an employer and have paid into their employer has paid into the UI system. And pause for kind of a big change about application for the CARES Act applies for a lot of people who are not just employees. But typically and traditionally, unless you're an employee, you aren't eligible for unemployment insurance. So the eligibility under that system are kind of three categories. One is that you have to have enough earnings history. You have to be monetarily eligible for benefits. And that means that you have to have earned enough money in the past 12 to 18 months, which is measured by quarters, to really, for the Department of Labor to find that you have made enough money to earn a weekly benefit rate. And we can talk a little bit more about that. You also have to have lost your job through no fault of your own, and typically there's kind of two things that come up when the DOL thinks you shouldn't be eligible because you didn't lose it through no fault of your own. One is if you committed misconduct. So if your employer finds out that you applied for unemployment and they want to contest your eligibility, they might say, no, this person was fired because, you know, I don't know, they stole from the company. That is misconduct, and that is disqualifying misconduct. Just because you're fired doesn't mean that you have committed misconduct. Being fired for being a poor salesperson, you know, it's not misconduct to be bad at your job. Misconduct is really something that you did where you knew that you were violating a rule, breaking a policy that basically was against the interest of the employer. So it can't just be your sales were bad three months in a row. It has to be a little bit more than that for misconduct to make you ineligible for unemployment insurance. And the other thing that happens a lot is that, you know, you have been separated from employment, but there's a question about whether you actually didn't want to stay at the job. And so one of the things that the Department of Labor scrutinizes is whether you left the job voluntarily, whether you resigned, or it wasn't that you were laid off or fired. So through no fault of your own is kind of a big aspect of your eligibility. And then the last category is basically that you need to be ready, willing, and able to work. And you know, I really think that means capable, available, and looking for work. So basically, you should be able to do the work, or to do some kind of work before you're certifying that you are looking for a job and you're able to work. Available basically means that you would be able to accept a job if you found one. And looking for work is that you're actually making best efforts to do a job search. So those are the traditional markers of what makes you eligible in that category: ready, willing, and able. And I should just note that we get a lot of questions about whether, for example, someone's receiving Social Security disability, you know, oh, they must be disabled, they must not be able to work. That's just not true. Just because you're receiving a benefit based on disability doesn't make you 100% ineligible for unemployment insurance purposes. There's plenty of people who receive, for example, SSD, who can do some work and who do work sometimes. And so there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding about, you know, about whether limited work could still count, and it can. And I suggest that you speak to an attorney if you have questions about that. Okay, so going back to the monetary eligibility, I just like to share this this calculator with folks. A lot of people ask, how much would I make if I were to apply based on my work history? And the answer is it's complicated. And the one of the best things that the Department of Labor has is to provide a calculator that, a calculator that you can plug in the numbers and they will tell you what your benefit rate generally is. And that rate usually comes out to be about half of your weekly earnings, to a cap of $504 per week. And so we can share that, we can actually share that link to that page. It's in the resources of the PowerPoint, but I don't think we need to actually look at it right now. So previewing the CARES Act here in this last bullet point, it talks about one of the big changes, which is this additional $600 that you all have probably heard about. But I'll just flag that the maximum benefit rate under unemployment insurance is $504. The minimum in New York is $104. New York has one of the lowest weekly rates in the country. It's just, it is what it is, and it's very low. Oh, right, and actually, I think that this is a helpful graphic. This is taken from the Department of Labor's website. A lot of people ask, oh, thank you. So Natalie put up the benefit rate calculator, and actually you should feel free to look at it while the presentation goes on. It's kind of fun to play with. A lot of people don't think of their earnings in terms of quarters. So that's a little bit of a, that's a little bit of a difficulty, but if your earnings are fairly constant, it's pretty easy to figure out what you would be earning in unemployment by using the benefit rate calculator. So the Department of Labor looks at your earnings using two different periods of time. And so the graphic you're looking at shows you the basic base period and the alternate base period. And what it is assuming you were to apply right now in this quarter, if you can see all the way over to the right, it says quarter you filed for benefits. So this quarter right now that we're living in, we're in May, does not count as counting your earnings. But the Department of Labor will look back at 4 out of the 5 quarters before. So looking all the way back to January 1st of 2019. And as you can see, the dates are, the way you might think about a fiscal year or in terms of quarters, you actually have the option of choosing the first 4 quarters of these 5, or the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, or I'm sorry, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th of your previous 5 quarters. And so when you apply, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, if you know that, for example, you didn't have a job that paid very much during that first quarter from January 2019 to March 31st, 2019, but you did have a job in January of this year that paid you a lot before the pandemic hit towards March, you can ask the Department of Labor to consider your alternate base period. The Department of Labor will automatically use your basic base period, and depending on your situation, you might actually make much more money if you choose the alternate, but they will not consider your alternate automatically, even if you tell them about those earnings, until you get a document telling you what your rate is. And that's your chance to say, wait, I'd like you to reconsider and to use my alternate base period. And that's the document is called a monetary eligibility or monetary benefits determination. Okay, so let's talk about the CARES Act, because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in the community about what it did, who's eligible for it, and I'd like to spend a little bit more time on that. So what the CARES Act is, it's a federal law that was passed by Congress that basically took, expanded on and extended the benefits that states give, their workers, basically, and temporarily it created 3 programs. We'll talk about the first 2. PEUC just adds that 13 weeks that you've probably heard of to make it 39 weeks of benefits that you're entitled to. Traditionally in New York, you're only entitled to 26 weeks of benefits, but under the PEUC, if you have a claim, you will automatically if you have a claim where you are receiving unemployment insurance, you will receive an additional 13 weeks of benefits. PUC, the Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, Congress didn't name them very creatively. They all sound the same, but what you really need to know is 13 weeks will be added on to your year, and you will receive $600 in addition to your base rate. So remember, we talked about the minimum being 104 in New York or maximum being 504. You will receive $600 on top of that to your regular weekly benefit, and that's a significant chunk of extra money for people right now, and it applies. It's right now they're still working out the payments for that, but it will apply retroactively to January 27th. And then the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA. So this is the one that I think is the biggest deal, and that I'd like to talk about as much as possible. So this is a completely new, not state run, or not state paid, I should say, very much state run program that pays 39 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits, with the rate still to be determined, plus the $600 PUC supplement for folks that aren't traditionally eligible for unemployment. So as I noted here in these bullet points, this can be workers with insufficient work history for regular unemployment insurance. It could be self-employed workers who are unable to work for any number of reasons due to COVID, including that their business has been effectively shut down. Gig economy workers, so you think about all the app-based delivery folks. Those are gig economy folks. Individuals who had a contract to start work and that contract was canceled. So maybe think about contractors who do construction, things like that. The example I like to give is of a client of mine who she called me about something else, and she mentioned that she hadn't worked as she worked as a home health aide, but she hadn't worked as a home health aide for 3 years, and she said, I can't get unemployment because I haven't been on the books. And I said, well, what have you been doing? And she said, I've been selling tamales out and fixing clothing, sewing clothing out of my apartment. And I said, no, you're eligible if you can't do that work now because no one's coming to your apartment to purchase tamales or to have you fix their, to sew to sew new pants or whatever, you have lost your livelihood, you are self-employed, and you can apply for unemployment insurance under the PUA, under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. So it really applies broadly, and it applies to several categories of people that I'm going to just, you guys can read the slide, but it applies to folks who basically had to quit their job as a direct result of COVID, and we'll talk about what that means. Those whose place of employment is closed as a direct result of COVID, those diagnosed with COVID or who have symptoms of and are seeking a diagnosis. So I'll flag that if the reason that you can't work is COVID related, the fact that you're supposed to be ready, willing, and able to work, if you've got COVID, you really can't be working while you have COVID, but you're still eligible for unemployment insurance under the PUA, under the PUA benefits. Caring for someone diagnosed with COVID. This is a huge one, providing care for a child or other household member who can't attend work or school because it's closed due to COVID. So many of us who have school-age children and whose childcare provider has shut down or whose nanny is unable to work will be eligible for unemployment insurance if they have no choice but to be at home and caring for their child right now. Those who are quarantined or advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. Those who could have started working but don't have a job now and can't reach their place of employment. or, you know, tragically, this has happened to many people, those who have become the breadwinner for a household because the head of household has died as a direct result of COVID. So, you know, the two categories that make you ineligible for pandemic unemployment assistance is if you can telework or if you're receiving paid leave. So telework, you know, working from home, like a lot of us are doing. If your employer has given you the option to work from home and you have said no, you aren't eligible for unemployment insurance because you basically haven't been separated through no fault of your own. You presumably could telework and you chose not to. Or if you are receiving paid leave, you can't get unemployment insurance and receive paid leave. Okay, so how to file a claim, and I know, and I wish I could see, you know, if you were all raising your hands, if a lot of you have already applied and are deeply familiar with the unfortunate delays and lags in the Department of Labor. Right now, a lot of this is sort of in theory about how to apply, but there's a lot of people who have had a lot of problems for several weeks, you know, 4, 6, 8 weeks with the process of applying for Department of Labor. And we're very aware of that. And we can talk about that a little bit about what your options are, but presumably as of April 22nd, the Department of Labor completely overhauled its system. It changed its entire website, and it unveiled this new process whereby claimants only are required to answer one set of questions that the Department of Labor will use to screen your eligibility for regular unemployment insurance or pandemic unemployment assistance. And instead of what they were doing before, which was making you apply, get denied, and then apply newly for PUA, which was taking forever. Now you are basically asked one set of questions, they do the screening, and presumably they call you back within a certain amount of time if they need any other information. There's been a lot of problems with this system, and we, in my office at NILAG, we're getting so many calls from folks who are saying they can't get through, they've been asked for more information, but no one's available to answer questions. And it's a huge problem, but I don't have great answers about it. We can talk about some of the resources that I can share at the end, but we also have a hotline where we're sort of tracking some of these issues. So I'm just noting here, there's no separate, a lot of people say, how do I apply for pandemic unemployment, or I was denied for regular unemployment, how do I get PUA? There's only one application. There is no separate application. So you should be considered for both at this point. Okay, so this is just information that you should have on hand once you start getting ready to apply. And mainly because sometimes it's a long application process on the phone or online, and many times you'll get timed out if you take too long to go try to dig up some of this information. So having your social security number handy, your driver's license or ID, for sure a phone number where you can be reached, a valid email address, the names and addresses of all your employers for the last 18 months, including those in other states, your address and zip code, probably you know that off the top of your head. And then this last one really trips people up all the time, which is if you have it, your employer's employer registration number or FEIN, because that has held up many people in their application process. Okay, so let's start with how to file a claim by phone. This is the only slide on it. Try to apply online if you can. They have extended their telephone filing hours to basically 7 days a week from 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And it is a good option for folks who need translation. But if at all possible, and that's why I have this like alarmist red writing at the top, it's just been so difficult to get through by phone. If you really have to apply by phone, try to call first thing in the morning, 7:30 a.m. I've had some success with that, but not much. So that is the information about where you can apply by phone. And it's an automated system of questions that you have to answer. There's a script that is read, and the claimants have to answer over the phone. It's pretty difficult. How to file a claim online. So this is the link to the application to the new DOL's website. If you have never applied for benefits before, you'll have to create a New York State government ID. or you can use your pre-existing one if you have, and you should be able to have the application in English and in Spanish at this point. Really important. Oh, for the folks who haven't been able to get through, your claim will be backdated to the date that you became unemployed. This is so important for people who have been saying, I tried to apply for 3, 4, 5 weeks and I couldn't get through. Once you finally do get through to the system and tell them when your last day of work was, the DOL should be measuring your benefits eligibility week by week from the day that you became unemployed. And some of you have probably heard of the waiting week. Usually under traditional unemployment insurance, you are asked to or required to wait 1 week before applying, before being eligible. That has been waived during the pandemic. So really you should apply as soon as possible, but you should also count the very first day you became unemployed. Okay, so just to share a little bit, we're going to go through a bunch of the screenshots of what it looks like right now, in case the DOL doesn't change their website again, but what it looks like right now if you go to apply. A lot of this is taken from Make the Road New York's excellent, even more detailed guide in English and in Spanish about how to apply. It's a step-by-step guide. So we have that link at the end of this presentation, and it's really an excellent guide. You should take a look at it, and it probably will answer questions that we can't get to in this limited time. So definitely encourage you to take a look, and I thank our partners at Make the Road for allowing us to use some of their resource and to spread this good information. So this is what it'll look like. You'll file a new unemployment insurance claim, and you'll click on File, Apply Online Now. And then this is the screen you'll look at and see when you have to enter your username and password. Or you'll click on Don't Have an Account, and you will set up your account. So that's what we'll go through right now. So this is what it looks like when you want to register yourself. First name, last name, email, and confirm your email. Make sure you use an email that you trust. Make sure you use an email that you remember and that doesn't have an overactive spam filter. Also, make sure you put in your name correctly. We have had people who get all sorts of confused about, like, maybe they did it quickly and so later they're not able to access their registration. It might be because they misspelled their own name. They were writing it quickly. It's happened to us all. So just do this registration really, really carefully. Write down your username and password and your security questions somewhere you'll remember, because I've been told, I haven't had a client where this happened yet, but I've been told it's really hard to recover your passwords and your username if you lose them. Okay, so going back, once you've created your registration profile, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to give you a series of online services that you can choose from. And unemployment insurance, in this green box, you see there's several options. So file a claim. Pay attention to those first 3 bullet points in particular. You know, filing a claim, obviously you want to do, but claiming weekly benefits right underneath that is really important, because it's what allows you to certify weekly every time you want to report that for another week you were unemployed and you're certifying for benefits. Okay, so this is the first page. You'll enter your social security number. And then this is a little bit small, but basically they're asking you to review the terms of applying for unemployment insurance. And, you know, it's about some of those eligibility categories that we talked about. The eligibility categories about looking for work, about, being available for work. You have to basically agree that you have read this. A big one, that you are avoiding fraud, that you are not claiming to have been unemployed when in fact you are working a few days a week, which unfortunately happens a lot. So they ask you to go through these questions, and then you click I agree if you, click I agree if you understand and agree with all those terms. Okay, so this is the first page of the application, and it's your personal circumstances. It's basically what happened that led to your being separated from your employment. And this example, it talks about, April 27th, but they basically asked this week, beginning Monday, April 27th, how many days have you worked? So this is, and I'll address this when it comes to partial unemployment, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it means to work in a day that claimants go through. the rule in New York State, and New York State has one of the worst rules about partial unemployment in the country. Maybe it's the worst rule, but basically, if you work 20 minutes in a day, if you work 1 hour in a day, if you work 6 hours or 12 hours in a day, it doesn't matter for unemployment insurance purposes. If you performed any work in a day, you are ineligible. Your eligibility is cut by 25%. If you worked 2 days out of a week, your benefit is cut 50%. The Department of Labor considers the work week to be 4 days. So if you worked 4 days or more, you are not eligible for that week at all. It doesn't matter if you earned very, very little. You could have worked 1 hour, 4 days in a row. You worked 4 days and you are ineligible. So, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but while it's on my mind, I'll just say, if you have any negotiating power with an employer and you can consolidate your work week where you can work more hours in a couple of days, you would still be eligible for partial unemployment insurance. And so I encourage you to consider doing that. And so that first question is really getting at how many days have you worked? If you have worked 4 or more, you're not eligible for that week. And every week that you certify, you'll be asked that question. So that, and then they ask you what day you worked, and then the questions go on to ask kind of what is the reason that that you are not working, and they start asking the COVID specific questions. So it's this combined hybrid application where they're asking you questions that could screen you for both. And I'm sorry that I know that the slides, these images are a little bit small. The Make the Road Guide has them. Also, you can take your time and read them if you really want to kind of prep for what it'll look like. So you'll be asked then if you made all of your money from running your own business or being self-employed. And so this is screening whether you're eligible for PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. So I'm going to read the question. Was all the money you earned in 2019 and up until today in 2020 from running your own business, yes or no? And then they ask you whether it was from being self-employed. So they're basically trying to find out whether you might be eligible for PUA rather than unemployment insurance, the traditional unemployment insurance, because usually you wouldn't receive those benefits if that's the reason that if that's how you made your money. Oh, and actually, let me just go back and make sure that, well, we can get to that answer later. There's a lot of questions about what it means to make money from your business, and we can talk about that during the frequently asked questions. Okay, I can't tell you how many people this question has tripped up. So this question, are you able to telework for the same hours of your customary job? And are you receiving paid leave? So the telework question, I cannot tell you. The Department of Labor has taken to Twitter to try to tell people out in the world to please answer this question correctly. I have a spreadsheet of clients who have answered this question incorrectly and who are now waiting on an appeal for months. So you should answer no, you are not able to telework if that is true. And the question is poorly worded, but it's really asking you, have you turned down an offer to telework, to work remotely? Not whether in theory, if offered a job, you would be able to telework. So please think about this answer or this question. If it applies to you, answer no if that's the right answer, because unfortunately it's tripping up a lot of people. And then the second question is, are you receiving paid leave? So these two questions are really geared towards screening out people for PUA, for the PUA that we talked about before. It's those two categories that make you completely ineligible. Okay, so this is basically the series of questions that literally go over the same categories of eligibility. They'll ask you if any of these are the reasons that you have lost your job or have no work. So I won't read them again, but basically they're going through, was your employment closed? Are you caring for a child or a household member diagnosed with COVID? A lot of the same questions we just went through. Okay, so yes, the availability question. You'll be asked if you're able and available to work. So don't overthink this question. If you have COVID and you're applying, you'll be asked if you're able and available to work. You can say yes, even if you've been diagnosed with COVID and you're quarantined. The point of this question is really to say, in spite of aside from the COVID related reason that you can't work, is there any other reason you're unable to work? So the answer is yes, if that's true. Don't say no if the reason that you can't work is is related to COVID and is basically the reason that you are eligible for unemployment insurance under PUA. Okay, so a lot of people ask what's better between direct deposit and the debit card because they give you that choice. I think for sure the direct deposit is a better option if you, and they will, the Department of Labor will default to the debit card. So make sure that you choose direct deposit if you have a bank account and you feel comfortable using it for this. I really think it's safer. You avoid any kind of issues with fees. Right now during the pandemic, it's not a great idea to be going out and to an ATM and withdrawing money from a debit card. So that is what I would suggest if at all possible. And you'll be asked, and this is the, yes, so this image right here asks about whether if you worked in the previous week, whether you earned more than $504 before taxes, and whether you're refused any job offers. So that's what this little screenshot is about. This 504 number is because you're ineligible for benefits in any week where you earned more than $504, which is the maximum weekly rate for the base rate under unemployment insurance under the UIB. So if you're close to that, you know, in terms of your earnings, it's unfortunate if you're just over it, because it really does make you completely ineligible. One big caveat, and this might come up for some of you, is that there's still an open question about whether self-employment income counts towards that 504 or not. If you are earning, let's say, $200 in W-2 income, but you know, $500 in 1099 income through your self-employment, you can, you know, you might still be eligible, but you should disclose that income to the Department of Labor. Anytime there's a question, it's like, oh, does this count? Does this money count that's coming in? I'm not sure. The best answer is be honest up front, disclose it, because at the very least, you know, the Department of Labor will see that from the very beginning you were honest about what income you had coming in, and they're not going to be flagging you for trying to commit any kind of fraud about whether you were eligible or not. And they often do accuse folks who have made honest mistakes of not fully reporting their income or fully reporting their reasons for being ineligible. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't skip. Okay, no. Oh, and they will ask you for your gross income for the past tax year. So it's helpful, again, it's helpful to have some of these documents right with you. Okay, so you're almost done. At this point, you are reviewing and submitting your claim. Make sure they will give you a screenshot. I don't think it's part of no, it's not. They'll basically give you a list of the questions you just answered, and it'll say true, false, or it'll have the dates that you entered. So it's a really good chance to make sure that you said what you meant to say. And then you click submit. After that, you might be given a message that you are going to get a call from the Department of Labor to finish your application. This is where many people in my experience have been in a limbo for weeks and weeks and weeks. Be patient, keep your telephone close by, and you should get a call from a restricted number. Really be careful. There's scammers out there that are just, you know, trying to trick people into giving up sensitive information. The Department of Labor representative who contacts you should, they might ask you for personal information like your Social Security, but they also should know the date that you submitted your application, and they should tell you that date. So if they don't tell you that, you know, you have a right to be suspicious. So I suggest that you not give out sensitive information to someone who calls if they can't give you that date. So the last kind of part of, you know, of the application part of this presentation is just a reminder. You have to certify every week that you're eligible to receive benefits. And certifying is literally just calling or going online, clicking on online services and claiming benefits. Most people do it on Sundays, which, you know, because it's kind of the last day of the week looking back. And that's where you answer the question, how many days did you work? Did you earn more than 504? Did you turn down any work? And again, we'll talk more about refusal of jobs. So that's the link for certifying every week. And if you forget to certify, it becomes an issue of trying to then ask for permission to backdate certifications that you, for whatever reason, forgot to do. So it really is important to do it every week. Oh, and here we are, we're talking about the questions that you'll be asked to continue to be eligible on your weekly certification. And again, they'll ask you, here's the questions about refusal. If you refuse a job offered for any of the following reasons, a family member is ill with COVID, or you're caring for a child whose school or childcare center is closed due to COVID, you've been ordered to quarantine by the government or a doctor, or are seeking, or you're receiving, or you have symptoms, I'm sorry, and you're seeking medical treatment. And so refusal of a job will flag your claim. And sometimes that means that the Department of Labor will suspend benefits while they investigate whether or not you had a good reason for refusing work. It's just, it's a little bit frustrating because we can't always tell when that's going to happen. So it can be risky to refuse work for any number of reasons, but if you have a good reason for refusing work, and you think that it's the right thing to do, you know, you just should know that the risk will be that you might get your benefits suspended for a time. I'll talk more about refusing work during the frequently asked questions because it's a big issue. So if you're denied benefits, really up until last week, hearings weren't happening at all, but basically you will find out you've been denied because you'll receive a document in the mail called a notice of determination. And it basically explains the reason for, you know, you are not eligible for X, Y, and Z weeks due to the following reason. And then they write out the reason. And it might be, you know, you were able to telework and, you know, and you didn't telework. And so now we think that you aren't eligible. It will give you the reason on the paper, and then it'll explain how you can request a hearing online. You know, it used to be, they didn't used to give you that option. You just write a really simple letter, I want a hearing, you'd send it to Albany, and they would eventually give you a hearing, but it would take, you know, a couple of months. We have a serious backlog. As of May 1st, there were 6,000 hearings in the pipeline for people who are just waiting for hearings for denials from before the pandemic. And the appeal board has finally started hearings up. There's, I have a client who has one tomorrow with somebody else. They're all phone hearings for now, but it's going to take months to get a hearing if you're denied right now, which is, again, another reason you want to just be super careful when you are filling out your application in the first instance. But you can ask for a hearing by mail or online, and you have to do it within 30 days of the date of the mailing of the the date of the mailing of the determination letter. They don't give you dates on these letters. They just say date mailed, which is a little bit frustrating, but just make sure you request that, that hearing within 30 days. We've been seeing that a lot of people are getting these forms super late, that the mail is really delayed, and so they've missed the deadline by the time they get their notices. Still ask for a hearing. You can explain the reason you received or you requested the hearing late. That'll be the first thing that will be dealt with at the hearing. So it's really worthwhile. And call a lawyer. They give you a brochure, and the Department of Labor provides a brochure with a number of legal services offices that will consider representation for free of people who have hearings. So definitely call those programs. NILAG is one of those. Okay, so I'm just doing a quick time check. So it's about 1/4 of, and we've gotten to the part with frequently asked questions. And I think what we'd like to do is to prioritize some of the ones that have been coming through. So I'm gonna, I guess, not go to the FAQs quite yet, unless some of you folks who have been collecting the questions think that there are any that I could go straight to. And let me just see, there's 2 actually in the question and answer, so maybe I'll read those first. And I'll start with the last one that just came in. Will you still receive the PUA $600 as to how much or how little your benefits will be? Yes, that's a great question. As long as you're eligible for $1 of the minimum of the base rate under the traditional unemployment or under the PUA, you will receive the $600 supplement on top of that. Let's see. Someone asked, where do you disclose that you're not working due to no children? think I need a clarification on that from Gladys Jones.
I can chime in, Anna Maria.
Okay.
Since our providers are open, but they don't have kids that are actually attending their program right now. They're willing and able to have kids, but no children are attending, and they're still potentially receiving subsidy waivers from the city.
Okay. So I want to actually, we have that question in the FAQ because I think this applies to several of you. So this is what I've written, and this gets at this issue of disclosing. So you can apply, and you want to disclose any income that you're earning through your business. You know, if you are truly not performing work, if you're not able to basically do anything to keep the business going, you know, you can say that you did not work, that you worked 0 days in the past week, you know, or that you worked 0 days as of the date that you're applying. But if you are performing work, and the DOL really, they define this really broadly. They define it like making phone calls, filling out paperwork that would keep the business going, even if no business is being done. They consider that performing work. So disclose that. Disclose the days you performed the work. As far as the subsidy money, you don't have to disclose. You don't have to think about the date you got the payment as the day you worked. It's really literally when did you perform work in service of the business, and then separately they're going to consider any money that you have earned. So as I say here, if you're not performing work, you should honestly answer no. But disclose the income you're receiving through the business. And then the Department of Labor will evaluate, you know, whether that income makes you ineligible. And it really shouldn't. For PUA, you know, I think this actually remains to be seen, but I think the cautious advice we're giving to people is try it out, apply. If you get denied for a reason that you don't think makes sense, where you want to explain more properly what the subsidy is, you can do so, but you know, it might unfortunately require a hearing. And that's just part of, because it's just such a new program. Let's see. If someone calls you and you get transferred to a machine to complete your application, is that real? So my understanding is that is under certain circumstances, you know, with robocalls, it's so difficult because I don't know of everything that is happening out there. If you are suspicious about it, you can choose not to answer and speak to the Department of Labor's Claimant Advocates Office, which I can share. But I think it depends on the kinds of questions that you ask, or you're asked from a machine to complete the application. I haven't heard of a specific instance, so I would be suspicious of being transferred to like an automated machine before the person asks you or confirms your claimant date, your claim filing date. So I think, not knowing all the details, I'd say be very careful. And if they haven't at least given you that, then, you know, don't answer those robocall questions, or those automatic questions, I should say. If you're self-employed, what number do you put as your FEIN when filing for unemployment? I'm going to defer to folks who deal with these kinds of questions where I actually haven't been asked that question before. I know for a time the DOL was saying put self as employer, and they would allow you to keep that part blank. I know you can continue if you put it blank, but I don't know if anyone else has a better answer for that.
We can look into that and follow up with you, hey, Judith.
Okay. So, Gladys Jones asked a great follow-up question about reporting the waiver money. Do you mean the subsidy money? So I think Natalie's saying yes. So my understanding is that there isn't a good way to report this information. So what we've been telling people to do is to send, your online portal has a little mailbox where you can send messages, to literally answer the questions on the weekly certification and send in real time, you know, send a message to the Department of Labor saying, I would like to explain income that I'm receiving. If you feel like you can't properly answer it in the questions as you read them literally, you should feel free to send them a message that they'll have a timestamp for it, and it'll show that you tried to disclose this information. Because everyone wants to do the right thing, but the people don't want to not answer the questions and not certify because they're not sure what the answer is. And so right now we are telling people that's kind of the safest option. And somehow I can't see oh, there they are. So I'm not sure if I know the answer to this one, and the question is, if I have just one child and the ACS pays just $175 weekly, do I have to apply for unemployment? And I'm not sure of the circumstances of the ACS payment. I'm just not as familiar with the setup with ACS about what the basis for the payment is. But I assume that means if you have one child attending the program. Rosemary, do you have, yeah. So if you have one child attending your program and you are working, if you're saying that you're unemployed, it depends on how many days you've worked. So again, putting aside the subsidy, if you're working 4 or more days, you aren't eligible for unemployment. And I think that's the first question you'd want to answer. I don't know if that one child only comes, a couple days a week. And then in terms of the payment that you're receiving for that attendance, I assume that's a subsidy that you receive for that child's attendance. The question is, are you eligible monetarily? Like, are you earning little enough that you're not earning more than $504 that week? I think the answer is that you would be eligible. I don't know if that's a subsidy, I don't know what else you're receiving for that child. Rosemary or Jane, I wonder if you have an answer beyond that.
I'm not sure about the specifics, but I did just want to make a note that if you are receiving $175 as the subsidy amount, the net that you would be claiming as income would be much less than that, because the amount that they're looking for is your net income and not your gross income, and the $175 would be your gross. One way that you can approach this is to look at the ratio in your tax return from 2019 between your gross and net income, and use that to apply it to the $175 that you might be getting this week or for right now, and put in that lesser amount. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just clearing out some of the questions that have already been answered. I'm getting used to this format.
And Anna Maria, I also have a few questions that were in the chat box that I'm not able to post in the Q&A box. So I have those that I wanted to read off as well.
Okay. I mean, if you want to read some of those now, I know those folks have probably been waiting because I think they came in earlier.
Yeah. So someone asked, one of her employees is not getting the extra $600. They applied in March, and they're getting unemployment for what their income is, but not the extra $600.
Okay. So they should eventually get that $600. We've seen that with a lot of folks who applied early. The Department of Labor, they are saying everyone will receive those $600 retroactively to the date that they became unemployed. And so it's just a question of waiting. I would say if it's, I guess, March, we're trying to keep track. So I'd say if it's been 8 weeks, I'd say if it's been over 8 weeks since they submitted their claim and started getting the money, and they still haven't gotten the $600, they should get in touch with us. And we have a COVID hotline at the end of the presentation that we can share. But I think that unfortunately that's pretty par for the course. The good news is that if she's receiving the base rate, it sounds like at least the application was submitted, and it's just a question of the delay and the rollout of the PUC add-on.
Great. The next question, thank you, is I owe unemployment $1,200 because of overpayment, $900 in overpayment and the rest in fees. They're telling me I have to pay it back first in order to receive unemployment, but I'm scared if I do, they will deny my benefits because of these prior issues.
Right. That's a great question. Actually, there's been a policy change on unemployment, on overpayments. This was a lot of people were trying to push for the Department of Labor to suspend their kind of very punitive approach to paying themselves back for overpayments before allowing someone to receive unemployment during this pandemic. They say they issued a press release saying we're no longer making people pay these overpayments before receiving their benefits. But I don't know how quickly that policy change will take effect. And I have also spoken to folks who are in that position. I think it's worth proceeding with the application. If you haven't applied because of the overpayment, because you're worried about that recoupment, apply, because it's as of 2 weeks, at least maybe 2 weeks that they made that announcement. So really, if the state is going to stand by its announcement that they publicly made, hopefully they'll stick to it and actually make that meaningful for a lot of folks, because a lot of people are being affected by that.
Great, thank you. Another question from the chat box is, I applied for unemployment before I realized I would still be getting paid from the network and the city as a childcare provider. I also received a PPP loan. I don't think I qualify now. How do I decline benefits?
Okay, so that's a great, that's a great question to think about, like, how do I make sure I don't get accused of misrepresenting? I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, one way that you can disclose income or ask to clarify a question that you answered is to send a message through the online portal to the Department of Labor. But to get at the first part of the question, you don't have to cancel out your claim. You can just not certify going forward if you don't believe that you're eligible. But speak to a lawyer, and I'm just going to go to the resources page in a moment, but speak to a lawyer about your eligibility before you just decide not to certify. If it's at all kind of a gray area, it's worth seeing if it might be worth just looking into it a little bit more, not just being suspicious of the possibility. The PPP loan funds, I guess I went to this question thinking that it might answer it, but I don't think it quite does. The PPP loan probably will make you ineligible for benefits if it's over 504 per week, but it does not necessarily mean that your employees will be ineligible for a host of reasons. I don't know if there was another part of that question.
There was not.
Okay.
I think that's it from these. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna, and we can go back to this, but this is I keep talking about this legal resource hotline. This hotline is one that we are running through my office Monday through Friday, 10 to 1. You call, you leave a message, someone calls you back. If you call at 10 a.m., you'll get called back that day fairly quickly. If you call closer to 1, you might get a call that afternoon or the next day. We're getting pretty heavy call volume, but a lot of it is based on unemployment. So take a look at that phone number, check out the hotline link. But I will continue to go through the questions, but I'll just keep that up. Okay, so if my daughter works with me, can she file unemployment as the business is closed, but she's not on the books for beginning of January? So the answer is, yes, she can file for unemployment if the business closed due to COVID. The question about not being on the books, that could mean a couple of different things. And in terms of for beginning of January, I'm not sure if you mean that she was working and then she doesn't have any work history after this January. But someone not being on the books in terms of eligibility, what that often means is they're still eligible, but the process of the Department of Labor evaluating their eligibility or their earnings will get slowed down if their earnings aren't accurately reported. And so that gets a little bit tricky. If you are the employer and she's technically your employee, you want to be very careful. And I think Rosemary, I think you and I have talked about this a little bit about how these situations can get a little bit messy, but Rosemary, do you have anything to add about the part about on the books? Because I might be interpreting it differently than it's meant in the question.
Also, there's a follow-up comment later on that says she's on the books now. So it sounds like perhaps she wasn't on the books for a short amount of time.
Okay, so you know, if she's on the books, that means if she's on the books now, and you know, probably what will happen is the Department of Labor will ask her about her earnings history, but they won't see all of it, and she can, when we talked about the monetary benefits determination that shows what the earnings were in every quarter. If she sees that there's missing earnings and she says, oh, but in January I did earn money, here's my proof that I earned money through this business, she can submit that to the Department of Labor, and they can basically reevaluate and redetermine what her rate would be. I caution you that I assume that businesses at the Department of Labor looks into sometimes if a business hasn't reported earnings, and so you should be cautious about, it sounds like you corrected an error, or maybe for whatever reason she wasn't on the books when she should have been, but as the business owner on that side of it, I would just be cautious, and I don't know if Rosemary and Jane have thoughts about what it looks like when a business is found from the DOL's perspective to not have fully reported income. I'm usually on the other side, kind of just counseling employees where this has happened, and not usually in a family member situation. But I don't know if you guys have anything to add on that.
I think for family childcare, there are sort of lots of ins and outs about when you do officially hire your children or not. I think the biggest consideration for most folks is that you know, your daughter would have to turn around and pay taxes because she has earned an income, and so you might want to do the math to actually see if, as a family, whether it makes sense to do it that way or not, or she could just simply help you out. And so, I don't know, I guess that would be sort of the advice. And in terms of having folks who are sort of not on the books, I guess, you know, the labor laws do say that most folks working for family childcare businesses and other businesses other childcare businesses would be considered employees. It'd be fairly rare to have a contractor working for you, unless, of course, they were coming from a temporary agency or they had their own agency and they were hiring themselves out and coming with their own business as a substitute. And so we would encourage folks to actually hire the folks that you do work with through a regular payroll process. But again,
Right.
It's your business.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, misclassification is an issue that we deal with on the employee side a lot, and more the Department of Labor is finding, or the appeal board is finding, an employment relationship, an employer-employee relationship, even in kind of gig economy kind of cases. Postmates workers and Uber drivers now in New York State are considered employees for unemployment insurance purposes, not for workers' compensation purposes. So it's very unusual. Depending on the benefit, you might be an employee for one benefit and not for another. But as of, I think it was the end of April, fairly recently, there was a decision from the highest court of New York saying Postmate drivers, specifically Postmate delivery workers, are employees for unemployment insurance. So the Department of Labor is taking a broader, approach where they, I think, are finding employee-employer relationships for purposes of unemployment insurance. Okay. And I'm going to, so do you know if we will have to pay a higher rate to unemployment insurance because all of our employees are collecting? I believe that under the CARES Act, you should not have to. And I could look into. Again, I just read that yesterday, that for PUA, that the intent of Congress was presumably that it wouldn't be a burden on employers, but I don't know how to confirm that. Jane, I see you, maybe you're nodding because you know.
I'm not sure if I know, but this is what I've been told as well, that the PUA and the federal stuff would not be affecting employers. but I've
Yeah.
read probably the same articles as you have, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's such a moving target. Everyone is learning as we go. So I see a question. I'm not clear on the response. If you're working 5 days with some children, but you lost a few children due to the pandemic, would you still be turned down for unemployment as a whole? So yes, unfortunately, if you're working 5 days, even if you lost a substantial amount of your income, you would likely still be turned down for unemployment. Because you would be working 5 days. I think a lot of people think of, but yeah, I'm working 5 days, but I lost a ton of income. And the Department of Labor really thinks about it in two separate questions. They say, how many days have you worked? And then they talk about how much earnings have you made? And that can be really frustrating for people who are working a lot, but not earning very much. And that's why I mentioned the thing about trying to consolidate your hours if possible. I know that's probably not possible for this kind of situation. You know, and I will say there's also the option for some folks, if money-wise it doesn't make sense, to decide that their business is not bringing enough income into, basically that it's too expensive to run it, and having to shut down and collect unemployment for that basis. And you would still be subject to scrutiny about, were you separated from your livelihood through no fault of your own? You know, did you make the decision to shut down so that you could get unemployment, which would make you ineligible? You really have to be able to make the case that it wasn't financially viable for you anymore to keep running your business. I hope that clears it up a little bit. And I'm sorry, yes, and actually that speaks to this other question about how applying for unemployment isn't childcare provider friendly, because this person's in the same situation. There's one child of an essential worker 5 days a week, and they've lost a lot of income. It's such a tough situation. I'm going to, don't understand this one question. Is it fair to say it's better not to give service at all? Oh, to basically not run your business. I think that's what the question is being asked. Is it fair to say that it's, the money-wise, it just doesn't make sense to keep going? I mean, I think there's so many considerations there, and I don't know if Jane and Rosemary, you have other thoughts. You know, I've sort of already gave my answer about that.
Yeah, in such a situation, it might make sense to apply for the PPP loan, because you can keep running your business and get that forgivable portion to help you, and look to other supports, and other expense reducing activities.
So we as providers are getting pay after the months pass. How can we tell about our income? I think this question is getting at, how can you disclose the income you're getting? And so I'll reiterate what I said about sending a message, a secure message through the portal, but please let me know if I'm getting that wrong. You can send the question again. Someone's asking if you have to prove that you contracted COVID and had to stop working, and how do you do that? So I've had that question a couple times, and I do not know of any instance where anyone has been asked for proof of having contracted COVID. And I think the catch-all sort of if you're feeling symptoms and you have been advised by a medical health provider to quarantine, I think that's looser than proving that you contracted COVID. A lot of people think they had it, but just quarantined and, you know, they didn't get a test. So I would be very surprised if there was any requirement to prove that you contracted it. And I have not heard of the Department of Labor scrutinizing anyone's application saying, well, I don't believe you that you had COVID symptoms. Show me medical documentation, but it's such a new program, the PUA, that it's possible that it's happened and we just haven't seen it yet. So are we taking PPP questions? Some. I think that I'm deferring the PPP questions to Jane and Rosemary for sure, but if you have them, you should feel free to type them. I see, is the stimulus considered income? Should you report it? Stimulus is not considered income. That's a great question for unemployment. You don't have to, no. If you were approved for unemployment in PUA but did not receive the PUA for all the weeks approved, what can you do? So I think you probably mean, and it's such an alphabet soup, but I think you mean the PUC, you mean the $600. Again, be patient. It should come if you are receiving the base rate, either under PUA or under the traditional unemployment, and you're waiting for the extra 600, that 600 should come. And if it's been more than 2 months from when you received your initial application, your initial benefits in your account, contact us at this number. We're trying to track those questions, but we're seeing a real long lag. So my infuriating answer is please be patient. You should get it. And I see one, HIPAA law, would it not cover that question? I'm not sure what the question is to that one. So if you want to type a clarify.
I think that was probably follow up to the, if you had COVID, do you have to prove it question.
Oh, I see.
If I understand that correctly. Gladys, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't think, so HIPAA would prevent your medical provider or your insurance, I think. I'm blanking on it, but basically it would be, it protects the privacy of your, medical records. You can still share your medical records or your medical information with someone who asks. I'm not sure the Department of Labor asking for medical documentation would be a HIPAA violation. So I'm on the resources page. I'm just going to, since we have a few minutes left, actually it's 7:10, I'm going to go back to some of the frequently asked questions and just scan through, unless we have any more in the chat.
No, we're up to date.
Okay, great. So I'm going to defer to Jane and Rosemary to elaborate on this one if they have more to elaborate on this first one about PPP. Oh, and I see someone just asked a question about PPP.
Hey, Rosemary, you want to take this? It's your answer, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane and Maria. So for PPP, as the slide says, once we receive it, we need to allocate the money, the funds. So at least 75% are allocated to pay salaries. That includes the provider and the employees of the business, and roughly 25% for utilities or rent. This covers 8 weeks. Now, to be clear on this, and I can even mention an example. I think that when we see, look into a case, it's a wonderful way to understand this. One provider applied to EIDL, PPP, and then unemployment. So EIDL, she used to cover the first 2 months of rent. PPP, she started covering the salaries and utilities, and then her unemployment request was approved. So what she did, she reported the money from PPP. That's always it's better to do, report the income. She reported the money, she allocated the money to her assistants, and she paid herself a lower amount than her usual amount because she, she didn't have enough money to cover the 100% of the 3 salaries. She reported her income for unemployment, and she kept receiving the $600 because her income was less than the quarters of last year. So it depends really. This has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis and do the numbers. The important thing, I guess, the key thing is to report the income that you get. Your weekly, reporting of your weekly income.
And I'm not sure, do you all think this has answered the question that's in the question and answer about the provider not paying herself through the payroll? Yes.
I wanted to just add for documentation purposes. So if the provider, for example, were an owner operator, so she doesn't run a formal payroll process to pay herself. So for example, if you're a sole proprietor, you're not running payroll to pay yourself, you just take whatever's left over from the business. And if you did get a PPP, what sort of documentation would you need to show that you're paying yourself, quote unquote, for those 8 weeks? I think in terms of documentation, there are a couple of different ways that you could do it. Folks have said that it might be easiest if you were to open up a separate bank account, put the proceeds of the PPP into that separate bank account, and actually make transfers out to yourself to pay yourself. If not, you can go ahead and actually just show some sort of a cash flow statement that includes those 8 weeks with all of your expenses and receipts for things like utilities. In general, I think if you get the 2.5 months for your PPP, which is the forgivable part, usually the math works out quite well, that 75% should be able to cover your salary, because the utilities will naturally be 25% or more, utilities and rent for most businesses. Some people actually even tend to say that the documentation isn't going to be very hard, but because all the numbers really are based on your 2019 tax return, which is really what you're claiming after the fact.
I was muted. So I applied for PUA in May, but I had closed my daycare March 16th. I was told that I would get retroactive pay from March 16th until the time that I filed. I have not received any retro pay. Will I still get it? All indications are that yes, you will still get it. And it sounds like you've been waiting a long time, and hopefully it will arrive soon. If it makes anyone feel better, I've spoken to a couple people who have waited about 8 weeks and finally were receiving, literally in the last 2 days, their first deposit of retro pay for a series of weeks. So I'm hoping that that is a trend. So the question is, the entire PPP loan forgivable if you spend the 75% on payroll and the 25% on utilities? I'll defer to Jane and Rosemary.
Yes, it would be.
Great. So it looks like right now there are no questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to just scroll through some of these. Okay, so I think I've already answered this a little bit, but if you're still working, but the number of hours you're working in a week have been reduced, how do you calculate what you're able to apply for with partial unemployment? And this again takes us back to this strange rule where the work week is really 4 days, and if you count by days, not necessarily by the pay that you've that you have lost. So again, any work even for a few minutes per day counts as days of work and will reduce your benefits by a quarter. So, okay, so this is a big one that we're seeing now. We're seeing at NILAG that people are being called back to work and they're not sure. And a lot of you all are receiving PPP loans, are trying to make a decision about how to rehire. So I'll read it. One of my assistants, an employee, is collecting UI benefits. I just received the PPP loan funds. My employee prefers to keep collecting unemployment instead of being paid her salary with PPP funds. She's also taking care of a family member with health conditions. Could she lose her unemployment benefits? And this is like a law school hypothetical test question, the kind of thing they ask you on these tests where you add a bunch of factors, but it's very much a real life situation. So the answer is that it really depends. If the reason she can't work is because she's caring for a family member because the regular caregiver is unavailable because of COVID, and if you can't provide leave to your employee, then she is eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. She's actually eligible for regular unemployment insurance benefits. It's a qualifying reason if you can't work because you're taking care of a family member. It doesn't have to be COVID either. It can be cancer. It can be another health condition. But we do talk to folks who are saying, "Oh, I don't want to go back to work because what I'm being offered to go back to work is less than what I was receiving at my original schedule and my original pay. So that happens a lot, and the employee will need to disclose to the DOL that she refused an offer of employment, and the Department of Labor is going to decide or not whether her refusal to work constituted good cause. And there's a bunch of factors that go into good cause for refusal. The big part of it that comes up a lot when it comes to accepting less pay is the question is basically, were you earning substantially less, or were the terms of your employment substantially less favorable? That's the terms that they use, compared to your previous job, and also compared to, actually more importantly, compared to the prevailing wage in the county where you work and for the title that you have. And the Department of Labor has a website where literally you can search by county and by job title to see what the prevailing wage is. It's basically what the average, what's been determined to be a fair wage for this title. And it's really broken up into very specific categories. They have servers, they have hostesses, they have very specific descriptions, and they will tell you for that county what the prevailing wage is. And the Department of Labor says, basically, depending on how many weeks you've been unemployed, you have good cause to turn down work if the work does not pay you, I think it's 80% of the prevailing wage rate in the county for the job description that you have. I'm happy to send the link to that search page. I think it would be confusing to go through live right now, but what you need to know is if you're thinking of turning down a job because you believe you're earning too little, just be aware that there is literally a rule that the Department of Labor will follow about whether it really was too little. There's other reasons that good cause could exist for turning down job. For example, if the job is inconveniently far away, which means 1 hour in a car, an hour and a half in public transportation. But for the most part, these are jobs people are being called back to. And so they know what the deal is in terms of the commute and things. The question is this really for less pay? And so that's a tough one, and I think refusal of employment is one that we're going to be seeing a lot for denials and for appeals about whether someone had good cause to go back. Okay, I see some other, someone asked, which do you recommend for applying first, UI versus PPP? Not having walked someone through the PPP process, I'm not sure which one. It's kind of apples and oranges a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. In theory, you could do the math to see for every single person in every single situation where it might make the most sense to get the most amount of money. So for example, if you know that, it's going back to the provider who had one child, right? So she has a very, very low level. In that case, definitely PPP, or maybe you just have somebody for, a child for 3 days or whatever. Then you would need to do the math to see where it actually makes sense. I think for the PPP, you can definitely turn it down. So I think our recommendation is to just go ahead and apply, because you can always make the decision later at the last minute to say, hey, look, I don't need this. I don't want this. My unemployment has come through and that's looking good for me, so I don't need this, or vice versa. You can make the decision later.
So there's a question, if I understand you are a provider, could you have both PPP and unemployment as long as the provider is paying themselves less than the minimum amount of the unemployment rate? And if I'm understanding it correctly, I think what you're saying is if you're paying yourself less than the max, the 504, could you receive PPP and unemployment? And it depends on the days worked, of course, but I think that the answer is yes, although I'm not sure what the Department of Labor would say about you having the control to kind of pay yourself just under. I don't know how they would see it, but I think that's basically the rule. I don't know if Jane and Rosemary have thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think it depends on how much money you made last year, because with the PPP, you basically get 2.5 months worth. And of that, 75% must be used for payroll. So you don't really have a choice about sort of how much you pay yourself, because with the PPP, you're taking that 75% of your proceeds and dividing it by 8, and that's how much you're getting.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a number that you would already know.
Okay. And someone's asking, is there a time limit to use the PPP funds? Because I plan to reopen in July. Do you recommend applying for PPP?
So the PPP, you have to use the funds during 8 weeks, and the 8 weeks starts on the day that you're dispersed the money. So this first tranche of PPP money, Congress gave SBA or the PPP loan funds a whole chunk of money, and it was gone in 2 weeks, and so they had to close down, and they opened it again now. And we're all, I guess, kind of waiting to see, well, how long is this tranche going to last? It would be absolutely lovely. I agree with you 100% if we could actually be on unemployment until July 30th, because the $600 is always there till July 30th, and then get your PPP. So your PPP would start August 1st and go for 8 weeks. That would be sort of the best case scenario. I just don't know if the PPP money is going to be around for that long.
I think Rosemary she wants to add something. I think she's muted.
Yeah, I'm muted now. Thank you, Ana Maria. I think every provider needs to consider the timeline. That's something that definitely you should factor in. Right now, remember, what we know is that the additional 600 will end as of the last day of July. So that gives us roughly 8 weeks. That means that if you apply now to PPP, and depending when that's approved, you will have also 8 weeks to use those funds. So you really need to factor that in, do yourself a timeline, and see what's most beneficial.
Okay. Thank you. So we're nearing the end of the time. I want to touch on one question that has come up a lot in my practice that I just want to, in case it comes up in yours. So we've spoken to a lot of people who are afraid to go to work or return to their job because of, if they might be high risk, they might live with someone who's high risk, they might be afraid of riding the train for good reason, in a packed train during this pandemic. So generally, again, it goes to whether or not you turn down a job or quit your job without good cause. And good cause is defined the Department of Labor when it comes to health condition or health and safety. They basically would require you to, they would investigate and require you to explain what were your specific concerns. And the PUA regulations have made clear that a general fear of COVID, a general concern about COVID being transmitted is not really enough to find good cause. You really have to have something a little bit more direct, a little bit more specific. We've been advising people to get to first show every effort that folks have made to make sure that they wouldn't be coming to an unsafe environment. So asking your doctor for a letter explaining what kinds of accommodations or what kinds of conditions you need at your job to keep you healthy if you have a health condition, or asking your employer to put in place certain basic safety measures, gloves, masks, things like that, the kinds of things that we've been hearing about on the news. But really, it's your decision. Folks are choosing sometimes between their health and their livelihood, and the only certainty is that the Department of Labor will look into why you refused work, and they'll evaluate whether or not it was good cause to, you had good cause to refuse the work or to quit. And unfortunately, they might suspend, I should say, your benefits while they're investigating whether you had good cause. But the more you can make the case, the more you can create a record of the efforts you made to try to work with your employer to keep the job before you had to quit, or to put in place protections before you refused work, and also a doctor's note that will make your case stronger in terms of if you have to make the case on an appeal for a denial. Oh, and I'm sorry, there is one last question on PPP. A PPP loan has to be paid back within 5 years plus interest, correct?
So I guess when we talk about the PPP loan and the economic injury disaster loan, I think we're focusing on the forgivable portion. And so when we say that you don't have to pay it back, it's really sort of looking at the 2.5 months worth of your 2019 bottom line. And that's really the amount that you would be going for. And so then, in fact, you don't have to pay anything back because that it would be all forgivable. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're done with the Q&A, which is great timing because I believe we're at the end of the time. And I have the resources page pulled up again. Just quickly, that second link is to the Claimant Advocates Office. Let me quickly explain what that is. It's an office within the Department of Labor that exists to deal with difficult questions you might have about your application. The big caveat is that it has to be an application that's already been submitted. You know it's been received. It's not that you haven't been able to call the telephone claim center. It's that you submitted the claim and something is happening that it's holding up your application. They're getting swamped with questions, but they are working really, really hard. And they are, I've seen them do good things for people who reach out to them. So you can send them a message through your online portal, but and that link is to the page that explains who they are and how to get in touch with them. And then that third link is again to the guide that Make the Road New York has in English and in Spanish to applying for unemployment.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna Maria. And thank you for sharing your knowledge about the nuances of unemployment. It is tricky, and we really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you gave to responding to every provider's questions. I'm sure other questions will arise as you all are navigating this whole system. You should feel free to email us, which is newyork@allerkin.org. And we will answer any questions and get back to you as soon as we can. I also, we want your feedback on how you thought today's session was, if we answered all of your questions and concerns around unemployment, and if you have any other thoughts about future webinar needs. We are offering this session in Spanish next Tuesday, June 2nd at the same time at 6 p.m. And so your feedback is really important to go for that session and for future sessions that we have. So please take 2 minutes and complete that form for us tonight. Again, I just want to thank you all for joining us and taking time out of your evening. I know that you have a lot going on, and we appreciate you and everything that you're doing during this time. I also really want to thank Anna Maria again and NILAG for putting this together and working with us, and for South Bronx Rising Together to help with the coordination, and to our amazing Allerkin team, Rosemary, Jane, and Hasiel for answering questions and helping with the back end side of things. So again, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And again, it's newyork@allerkin.org. And we hope to see you all soon. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.